Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, April 21st, 2022. President Joe Biden announcing more aid to Ukraine, $800 million for military hardware, including heavy artillery, plus $500 million in economic aid, and calling on Congress to authorize even more assistance for Ukraine when it comes back from recess next week in the fight against Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin declaring success in the battle of the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, despite hundreds of Ukrainian fighters holding out in an industrial complex. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she is committed to working through the G20, the group of countries with the world's top economies, to address problems caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, even though she and several other Western officials walked out of a finance meeting on Wednesday as Russian officials were speaking. Russia has become a key issue in the French presidential election runoff this weekend between Emmanuel Macron, the current president, and the challenger, Marine Le Pen. We'll talk about the race with an expert on Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations, what it means if Le Pen wins, not only for France, but for the U.S., NATO, and the European Union. And former President Barack Obama discussing disinformation in the digital age at Stanford University in California. First, an update on a story that caused a bit of a scare Wednesday night on Capitol Hill in Washington. Washington Post reports that a day after a U.S. Army plane heading to Nationals Park triggered an evacuation of the Capitol, authorities were still trying to determine Thursday how and why the U.S. Capitol Police wasn't made aware of the flight. No leader or agency took responsibility for Wednesday's potentially dangerous error, which caused people to flee the Capitol's offices and public spaces a little after 6 p.m. Eastern, but some did point fingers. The Army said Thursday it had followed protocol and notified the Federal Aviation Administration of its plans, which involved a jump into the stadium by 4 members of its Golden Knights parachute team. They were flying into Nationals Park, where the Washington Nationals play, not far from the U.S. Capitol. Federal Aviation Administration says it is reviewing what happened. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi putting out a statement Wednesday night saying that the FAA's apparent failure to notify Capitol Police of the flyover for a military appreciation night was outrageous and inexcusable. FAA statement says it takes its role in protecting the national airspace seriously and will conduct a thorough and expeditious review of the events this evening and share updates. Now to Russia's war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden announcing another $1.3 billion in aid to Ukraine, $800 million for weapons, including heavy artillery, ammunition, for the howitzers, trucks to tow that artillery, and drones, and $500 million in economic aid. This as fighting intensifies in eastern Ukraine, the area known as the Donbass, and the southeast, which includes the port city of Mariupol. President Biden at the White House today also calling on Congress to authorize even more funding when it returns to session next week beyond the $13.6 billion already approved.
The sustained and coordinated support of the international community, led and facilitated by the United States, is a significant reason why Ukraine is able to stop Russia from taking over their country thus far. Every American taxpayer, every member of our armed forces can be proud of the fact that our country's generosity and the skill and service of our military helped arm and repel Russia's aggression in Ukraine, to beat back Putin's savagery that tried to seize Ukraine's capital and wipe out Ukraine's government. The Battle of Kyiv was a historic victory for the Ukrainians. It was a victory for freedom, won by the Ukrainian people with unprecedented assistance by the United States and our allies and our partners. Now we have to accelerate that assistance package to help prepare Ukraine for Russia's offensive that's going to be more limited in terms of geography, but not in terms of brutality. Not in terms of brutality. Combined with our recent drawdowns, it will ensure a steady flow of weapons and equipment into Ukraine over the next few weeks. However, with this latest disbursement, I've almost exhausted the drawdown authority I have that Congress authorized for Ukraine in a bipartisan spending bill last month. In order to sustain Ukraine for the duration of this fight, next week I'm going to have to be sending to Congress a supplemental budget request to keep weapons and ammunition flowing without interruption to the brave Ukrainian fighters and continue to deliver economic assistance to the Ukrainian people. My hope is, and my expectation is, Congress would move and act quickly.
President Biden at the White House. He says he discussed the new assistance package in person today with the visiting Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal at the White House. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanking Biden in a tweet that reads, "This help is needed today more than ever. It saves the lives of our defenders of democracy and freedom and brings us closer to restoring peace in Ukraine." Russian President Vladimir Putin claiming victory in Mariupol and ordering his troops not to risk more losses by attacking the giant steel plant in the city that still has Ukrainian soldiers and civilians holding out. Putin, in a video posted by the Russian government, telling his defense minister to seal off the plant so that not even a fly comes through. And he said the completion of combat work to liberate Mariupol is a success. Congratulations, he said to his defense minister. President Biden, at the end of his remarks at the White House, asked about this development.
What does Putin claiming control over Mariupol mean? How significant is that?
Well, first of all, it's questionable whether he does control Mariupol. One thing for sure we know about Mariupol, he should allow humanitarian corridors to let people on that steel mill and other places are buried under rubble to get out. That's what any head of state would do in such a circumstance. And so there is no evidence yet that Mariupol is completely fallen.
Associated Press writes Ukraine scoffed at the idea that a Russian victory in Mariupol was already achieved. Oleksiy Arestovich, an advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky, said the situation means the following: they cannot physically capture the steel plant. They have understood this. They suffered huge losses there. Also from AP, the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu estimating 2,000 Ukrainian troops remain at that plant. And Ukrainian officials said about 1,000 civilians also trapped there, along with 500 wounded soldiers. All told, more than 100,000 people believed trapped with little or no food, water, heat, or medicine in the city itself, and that's about a quarter of the pre-war population. After meeting with President Biden, the Ukrainian Prime Minister went to the U.S. Capitol down the street and met with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She says the House will vote for that additional aid to Ukraine next week.
He announced this morning some expanded sanctions as well as some opportunities to help meet the needs of the Ukrainian people. We have passed, as you know, a $13.6 billion legislation appropriation that is about humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, and military assistance. We want to do more. The president said he will be asking Congress for more. We'll learn about that in the next day or so, to be taken up as soon as we can next week. We want to learn, though, from the distinguished ambassador, Shmyhal, from Ukraine, as to what the priorities and needs are, so that we can be on time, ahead of time, for some of them in anticipation of some further needs.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that the two then went to a closed meeting with both Democratic and Republican congressional leadership to discuss that additional aid package. From CNN.com, finance ministers from multiple nations walked out of a closed-door G20 session in Washington on Wednesday when the Russian delegate began his prepared remarks, a show of protest against Moscow for its invasion of Ukraine. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen participated in the walkout, as did European and other Western officials who were participating in the meeting. Well, Yellen held a news conference today, was asked what this means for the future of the G20, or Group of 20, a forum of 19 countries that are the world's largest economies, plus the European Union, when it comes to dealing with Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yesterday, you and a number of U.S. allies walked out of the G20 meeting when the Russian officials started to speak. I'm just wondering sort of how you see this forum going forward. Do you expect this kind of thing to continue to happen? And how does the G20 sort of accomplish what it needs to on debt relief, on climate change, and the things that it's charged with agreeing on, if you can't sort of agree on communiques and statements? Also, just wondering if you can provide us a little more detail about your views on the revamping of the international financial architecture, like you discussed the other day at the Atlantic Council. What does that look like? Thank you.
Sure. So, I think it simply cannot be business as usual for Russia in terms of its participation in our global forums, whether it's the G20 or other forums where we meet to address common challenges. I think participation in those forums really requires a commitment on the part of countries to obey the fundamental norms and values underlying international cooperation. And my decision, along with that of others, to leave when the Russian finance minister began to speak was intended to make clear that Russia's behavior so violates, is so offensive to international norms that we're not willing to allow Russia to participate or to listen to what the Russians have to say. Now, it does, to remove a country from any participation, really requires a very high level of agreement in many fora, including the G20, and there wasn't that level of agreement. But I think we looked for a way to make our disapproval known while still recognizing we have a lot of work to accomplish. And a key piece of that work is needing to discuss the impact of Russia's horrible war of choice against Ukraine on the global economy, to talk about food insecurity, rising energy prices, and the like. And we are continuing to get that work done in all the fora that I'm participating in this week, while making clear that we thoroughly disapprove of Russia's involvement. So, President Biden has made clear his view, with which I agree, that Russia should be removed from participation in the G20, but we'll see where we go moving forward.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, a news conference at the Treasury Department in Washington, as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund holding their spring meetings this week. As she mentioned, one of the issues being discussed at the meetings, the effect of the war in Ukraine on global food prices. At one World Bank session today, a speech, virtual, by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Russia has blocked our ports in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. This has reduced our export, including agrarian export, and it already impacts world food safety. A recent UN report said that 47 million people in 81 countries of the world will starve because of growth of prices for food. And this is not about physical shortage of food in many countries of Africa and Asia. This will also cause political instability and maybe a new migration crisis. People will look for the guilty, those who are guilty in that, and they will go out on the streets. They will look for a way to save themselves. We are doing everything we can in order to build up the export of our products, and we have started sowing sowing in the fields as much as we can, but nobody in the world can be sure that we'll be able to guarantee food security as long as this war is going on. To stop the war now and to liberate our territory from the Russian invaders is the only secure way to stop the development of a food crisis. Russian military are aimed at destroying all objects in Ukraine that can serve as an economic base for life. That includes railroad stations, food warehouses, oil refineries, etc. At this time, we need up to $7 billion US dollars each month to make up for the economic losses, and we will need hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild all this later. I'm sure that all of you have seen those calculations.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing a World Bank session today virtually. From ABC News, they write Ukraine is considered one of the breadbaskets of the world and is a top 10 global exporter of a number of key agricultural products, including wheat, barley, corn, sunflower oil, soybeans, and poultry. An estimated 70% of the country is used for farmland, land that is currently being devastated by assaults by Russian forces. That from ABC News. Russia has also become a major topic in the French presidential election runoff scheduled for Sunday between the incumbent Emmanuel Macron and the challenger Marine Le Pen. A runoff needed because both of those candidates got the most votes, but not a majority in the first round in a field that had a dozen candidates. It was held a couple of weeks ago. The winner this Sunday will serve a 5-year term as France's president. During a debate Wednesday night, Macron accused Le Pen of being beholden to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
You are, in fact, in Russia's grip. In 2015, you, madam, took out a loan with the first Czech Russian bank, which is close to the authorities, and you reworked it. All of this is fact and well known. Working with a number of people who were directly related and involved in the war in Syria. So you're not talking about other leaders, but just about your banker when you mentioned Russia. So obviously, when there are brave decisions to make, neither you nor your representatives are in attendance. And it's hardly surprising that 5 years ago, Russia interfered in the campaign to destabilize me, and it's hardly surprising that you were a bit unsure what to say, because you're just not going to be able to operate to defend French interests because of how they're tied with yours.
Emmanuel Macron, through an interpreter, at the French presidential election debate Wednesday night. The opposition candidate, Marine Le Pen, criticized Macron's economic policies.
Together with your government, I heard you praise yourselves for increasing purchasing power for the French people. But all I hear from the French is that their purchasing power has gone down, that they can't make ends meet, that they're having a hard time, that they're struggling. And 70% of the French population believe that they have lost purchasing power over the past 5 years. So you have made choices. The carbon tax, for example, has increased the price of gasoline. You have chosen to reduce handouts that were so key to helping the French.
Matthias is a senior fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations and has been following the French presidential election. He joins us now by phone. Welcome to Washington today. I want to start with Emmanuel Macron tying Marine Le Pen tightly to Russian President Vladimir Putin. What role has Russia played in the French election?
Yeah, Russia has not so much been able to directly interfere in the election through misinformation the way they have done in the past, but it was more like Russian actions in Ukraine that kind of, portrayed the links that Le Pen had with the Russian regime through a loan for her party, through a Russian bank that has close ties with Putin and so on. But in general, just her pro-Putin policies, right? She's even said that once the war is over, she wants to reestablish close ties with Putin's regime and so on. So the kind of closeness Le Pen or comfort she has with, Putin-style dictators has been exposed as something that's probably not in the French interest.
If Marine Le Pen were to win and replace Emmanuel Macron as French president, what does that mean then for NATO, the European Union, U.S.-French relations?
It's bad for all, right? In the end, she has pledged multiple times, including on yesterday's televised debate, that she would take France out of the integrated military command structure of NATO, which would be a bit of a body blow at a moment where NATO is, proud to be so united on this and is even talking about further expansion to countries like Finland and Sweden. And of course, France is a big military power, right? Has nuclear weapons, has global reach. She says she won't take France out of the European Union, so there will be another Brexit, but all her policies are incompatible with EU membership. And it's mostly to do here with the single market, right? So the single European market means that there's free movement of capital, labor, goods, and services. But then you can't say I'm going to give priority to French citizens for jobs and not to Bulgarians or Polish citizens. That, of course, has implications for French citizens who don't work in France, but in the rest of the single market. So that's the second thing. And so overall for the West, this would be a big blow, and it would probably lead to policy paralysis, which is the last thing they need right now.
What does it say about the French electorate that Macron and Le Pen were the two top vote getters in the first round and neither got a majority?
Yeah, in general, it's incredibly hard for a sitting president to get an outright majority in the first round. There's this old saying that the French vote with their hearts in the first round and with their heads in the second round. Right? So the first round is basically a free-for-all. People really vote on their pet issues. There's a lot of candidates. What was striking, however, is that Macron did very well, better than expected, 28% of the vote. But the traditional parties, center-left and center-right, Republicans on the right, socialists on the left, didn't even get the 5% mark. Very weak candidates, very weak campaigns. And so the extremes, both Marine Le Pen with 23% on the far right, but also Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's a kind of mixture of Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, and Hugo Chavez, if you want, did also very well with 22%, almost beating Le Pen for second place. But it does show you that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the current Macron policies. Right on the right, they feel he's not been tough enough on immigration. On the left, they feel that he's been mostly a president of the rich.
Well, the old saying in the United States is dating back to the Bill Clinton presidency. It's the economy, stupid. How has the economy been doing, and how has that affected the race?
Yeah, and here it's a very good question because Marine Le Pen very cleverly has pivoted to the economy, bread and butter issues, especially, of course, inflation, standard of living issues, which is affecting everybody in France right at the time, rising food prices, rising fuel prices. So she stayed away from the more kind of cultural warfare, identity-related things that are more divisive, and has very heavily focused on, okay, here we've had this president for 5 years in power. How are you doing at home, right? How can you pay the bills? Can you afford all the things that you have to afford? And I think that's what has allowed her to actually garner quite a few votes from the disaffected left as well. Also, because in the first round, she was outflanked on the far right by a guy called Éric Zemmour, who was even more xenophobic, more outrageous on some of these policies. It allowed her to position herself as quite a moderate in the end.
And finally, are you willing to make a prediction about who's going to win?
Yes, I'm quite confident in the end that Emmanuel Macron will get a second term. I mean, the polls, as I expected, the polls have moved in his favor, in the president's favor, since the first round, so since April the 10th. People are now taking a very close look, right, at what a Le Pen presidency would mean, and it would be a big step in the dark for many, right? So in the end, for anybody who has assets to protect, anybody who doesn't want to go take a risk with EU membership or NATO membership at a time of such kind of stress in the European system, I think they will in the end, even if they don't like him, hold their nose and vote for him. That said, there is an element of uncertainty, and that's turnout, right? So if a lot of people now look at the latest polls and say, well, it's 56 Macron, 44 Le Pen, it's in the bag, I want him to win, it's a nice day, I'm going to go to the bar or to the beach rather than vote, then there's a risk that it actually could be quite a bit closer. That said, I think Macron is going to win in the end more comfortably than many polls are giving him credit for.
Matthias is a senior fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Find his work at cfr.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And C-SPAN covered the nearly 3-hour presidential runoff debate from Wednesday night between Macron and Le Pen. We have it archived at cspan.org. The runoff election itself, is this Sunday. Washington Today continues in a minute.
President Joe Biden and Senator Mitch McConnell have been political and policy opponents for years, but they're also longtime friends. The They've even said nice things about each other in public.
Mitch McConnell, Mitch, I don't want to hurt your reputation, but we really are friends. And that is not an epiphany we're having here at the moment. You've always done exactly what you've said. You're a man of your word, and you're a man of honor. Thank you for being my friend.
When we think about Senator Biden, certainly we think about his marvelous personality, his demeanor, his friendliness. He can have a good rip-roaring debate without being disagreeable, as we all say. He's been a pleasure to work with.
In this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly, we remember some of the pleasant, friendly things Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell have said to each other and about each other. C-SPAN's The Weekly. Find it and follow wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. Florida's House of Representatives passing a bill to dissolve Walt Disney World's private government. The Senate passed this bill yesterday. Associated Press explains that it hands Republican Governor Ron DeSantis a victory in his feud with the entertainment giant over its opposition to a measure that critics have dubbed the Don't Say Gay law, which prohibits instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade, as well as instruction that is not age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate. And the U.S. Army changing its policy for pregnant soldiers to make family life and military career advancement easier. It includes extending exemption from height and weight requirements from 6 months to a year for pregnant and postpartum soldiers, no longer requiring pregnant soldiers to wear dress uniforms, and allowing new moms to defer deployments for a year. From Bloomberg News, former U.S. President Barack Obama warned that the way Americans communicate on social media networks has weakened democracy. Obama, who owns the podcasting and film company Higher Ground, warned that citizens no longer know what to believe thanks to false information spreading online, and that this is leading to political skepticism among citizens. President Obama spoke at Stanford University, Palo Alto, California, and he said that government regulation of some sort is necessary.
I believe we have to address not just the supply of toxic information, but also the demand for it. On the supply side, tech platforms need to accept that they play a unique role in how we as a people and people around the world are consuming information, and that their decisions have an impact on every aspect of society. With that power comes accountability. And in democracies like ours, at least, the need for some democratic oversight. For years, social media companies have resisted that kind of accountability. They're not unique in that regard. Every private corporation wants to do anything it wants. So the social media platforms called themselves neutral platforms with no editorial role in what their users saw. They insisted that the content people see on social media has no impact on their beliefs or behavior, even though their business models and their profits are based on telling advertisers the exact opposite. Now, the good news is that almost all the big tech platforms now acknowledge some responsibility for content on their platforms, and they're investing in large teams of people to monitor it. Given the sheer volume of content, this strategy can feel like a game of whack-a-mole. Still, in talking to people at these companies, I believe they are sincere in trying to limit content that engages in hate speech, encourages violence, or poses a threat to public safety. They genuinely are concerned about it. They want to do something about it. But while content moderation can limit the distribution of clearly dangerous content, it doesn't go far enough. Users who want to spread disinformation have become experts at pushing right up to the line of what at least published company policies allow. And at those margins, social media platforms tend not to want to do anything. Not just because they don't want to be accused of censorship, because they still have a financial incentive to keep as many users engaged as possible. More importantly, these companies are still way too guarded about how exactly their standards operate, or how their engagement ranking systems influence what goes viral and what doesn't. Now, some companies have been taking the next step in managing toxic content, experimenting with new product designs that, to use just one example, add friction to slow the spread of potentially harmful content. And that kind of innovation is a step in the right direction. It should be applauded. But I also think decisions like this shouldn't be left solely to private interests.
Former President Barack Obama at Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center in Palo Alto, California. He also talked about the 2016 election and alleged Russian interference. He said that while he directed intelligence agencies to go public with how Russia attempted to interfere, he now spends a lot of time thinking about what he didn't do. He said, "What does still nag at me was my failure to fully appreciate at the time just how susceptible we had become to lies and conspiracy theories, despite having spent years being the target of disinformation myself." He said, "Putin didn't do that. He didn't have to. We did it to ourselves." The U.S. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is disputing a New York Times report that he and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had privately planned to ask then-President Donald Trump to resign for inciting the attack on the U.S. Capitol January 6, 2021, by that mob supporting Trump's false claims that he won the presidential election. In a statement, McCarthy called the Times reporting totally false and wrong and accused the news media of doing everything it can to further a liberal agenda. McConnell's office declined to comment. The New York Times had those revelations in a portion of an upcoming book. An article from Roll Call: anyone waiting on a delayed tax refund from the IRS may not want to look to Congress for a speedy solution. House Oversight and Reform Subcommittee hearing Thursday laid bare the partisan divide over whether a funding boost would fix a beleaguered tax agency suffering from staffing shortfalls and outdated technology. Here is part of the virtual hearing with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat from the District of Columbia, questioning the IRS Commissioner Charles Reddick about taxpayers calling the IRS and often not getting an answer.
In the 2021 tax filing season, the IRS received 195 million calls, more than 4 times more calls than the agency received in 2019, 2 years ago. At the end of the 2021 tax filing season, the IRS had 5.9 million pieces of unanswered correspondence, nearly 3 times more than the 2 million pieces in 2019. And as Mike described, GAO also found that the Where's My Refund tool is not actually helpful in explaining why a refund is delayed. Let me put up another figure. This figure shows a large increase in telephone call volume over time at the IRS. The large gray bar in 2021 represents nearly 160 million calls that were abandoned by frustrated taxpayers, disconnected by the IRS or who received a busy signal. Mr. Redding, what happened? Can you describe what happened?
Yeah, it's a confluence of issues, as we've testified, and also it is in my written testimony. We had unprecedented demand in every lane. We have limited technology to be able to serve that. We have 15,000, but with COVID funds, we're able to bring on another 1,000 customer service representatives. But at one point, we were receiving phone calls at the rate of 1,500 per second. And if you go through the entire system, we had legislative changes both in December and during filing season, and the legislative changes could not be put into an automated processing, which required between 25 and 30 million returns to be manually processed, We used our ARP funding to bring in technology to the manual process, and the really success part of that, no part of it is a success if somebody can't get a refund, can't get through. You know, we're all in that every American deserves to have their telephones answered. We do have in-person taxpayer assistance centers that during COVID went to an appointment basis, but we also have online accounts. We have chat bots, we have voice bots, we have live assisters online. And we have now, this year, VITA is back, but VITA was not really operating during the pandemic because of in-person interactions. So what I could say is at the end of the day, what really hit us was COVID-related demand. What also really hit us was changes in legislation as we have already done our technology for filing season 21. And then during filing season 21, additional changes, and all of that required manual processing. And, you know, the history of everything that we've been talked about and, you know, what you all have said today, the history of the agency. We have not been able to upgrade, create, and bring on board technology, and we welcome oversight. We welcome oversight from this committee. We welcome oversight from our taxpayer advocate. We welcome oversight from Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. We welcome oversight from GAO. We welcome oversight from the media. I mean, the media is as impactful on an oversight basis as quite frankly, the rest. And the agency and the employees here are doing their best. I'm confident that if you were sitting in my chair, that you would look at it and you would see the difficulties that we have. This agency, and I'm not the first commissioner, I believe, to say this, has constantly had to move resources from less visible options into more visible options. And the pandemic caught up with that processing. And maybe I should have said in the beginning, the folks who handle phone calls in one of our lanes, the folks who handle phone calls also handle paper inventory. And I am the commissioner who shut down the Internal Revenue Service. In July of 2020, we had over 23 million pieces of unopened mail. We are currently opening mail presently opening mail current. We get 1 to 1.5 million pieces of mail a week. We process 1 to 1.5 million pieces of mail a week. Our current inventory on mail is about 380,000 opened, and then it's pushed out to the various lanes. But when we reopened and on site, so there's been some talk about when are IRS employees going to come back to work. On site in our processing campuses, our people came back in June of 2020, socially distanced, working split shifts. We've had mandatory overtime for more than 6,000 employees for an extended period of time. We have authorized overtime, and I see my time is up, so that's why I stuttered. Sorry, I'll close. But we have authorized overtime for more than 10,000 employees in those lanes.
The IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig, questioned by Eleanor Holmes Norton, congressional delegate from the District of Columbia, a House subcommittee hearing today. More from the article at Roll Call. The subcommittee chair, Gerald Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, said it was time to reverse decades of starvation of the IRS by the Congress, and he said is hamstrung the timely processing of tax returns. But Republicans made clear they would not support a major funding boost without greater scrutiny of the IRS. They said the agency suffers from poor management on technology projects and can't always be trusted to protect confidential tax information. Well, the ranking Republican on the subcommittee, Jody Hice of Georgia, questioned the commissioner about reported leaks of tax documents to ProPublica, which wrote a news story about taxes paid by some of the wealthiest filers in the United States.
Commissioner Rettig, on June 29th of 2021, Ranking Member Comer wrote a letter to you seeking information regarding the leak of taxpayer information that led to the story that I mentioned in my opening statement in ProPublica. Basically, the letter from Mr. Comer draws attention to the lack of an adequate audit trail system that would record events occurring on the IRS's system, such as people accessing sensitive files. And although I appreciate your comments that you welcome oversight, the fact is, from our experience, although you did answer some of the question, there were much in the letter from Mr. Comer that you never answered. So let me ask, has the IRS taken steps to improve its audit trail capabilities in order to ensure that it knows who is accessing sensitive taxpayer information?
We have that in process, and we're trying to do all we can. Taxpayer security, taxpayer protection of their data is really one of the highest priorities for the Internal Revenue Service. The comments that were not answered in that letter deal with specific instances, and I believe that we referred Congress to Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. They have sole jurisdiction over that particular issue. And so detailed questions I would refer to TIGTA.
Well, let me ask you this. Does the IRS identify, do you have any way to identify returns of and other type of information on individuals who may be at higher risk for leaked information? Do you red flag those? Is there any way of identifying who might be high risk?
There are certain systems for individuals in certain categories, but that would, when you're talking about high income folks and high net worth, whether they would fall into that, but the protections for everyone are significant. And I don't believe that there has been a public statement that it actually was a leak or a breach from the Internal Revenue Service where that data came from. So, I put that on pause and ranking member, like you, I share the concern here. The delay in getting answers for the public certainly impacts the ability of the public to have trust and respect for the Internal Revenue Service.
Yeah, it sure does. And regardless of where it came from, there was a lot of sensitive information that was leaked or that was made available. And we've got to have answers to that, Mr. Commissioner.
Question to the IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig from Congressman Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia, ranking member on the House Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on Government Operations. President Biden is proposing $80 billion over the next decade for hiring more IRS employees, bringing in new technology to the IRS, and increasing collection of taxes owed, known as the tax gap. Homeland Security Department says it's going to extend temporary Title 19 requirements and continue to require non-U.S. travelers entering the United States via land ports of entry and ferry terminals at the U.S.-Mexico border and U.S.-Canadian border to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. You might have heard the Biden administration plans to terminate a separate regulation, Title 42, which allows migrants at the U.S. border to be turned away due to the coronavirus emergency. That's scheduled to lapse on May 23rd. Many Republicans in Congress and some Democrats raising concerns about the expected increase in immigrants arriving after it does lapse. President Biden asked about that today.
On Title 42, sir, are you considering delaying lifting Title 42?
No, what I'm considering is continuing to hear from first of all, there's going to be an appeal by the Justice Department. Because as a matter of principle, we want to be able to be in a position where if in fact it is strongly concluded by the scientists that we need Title 42, that we be able to do that. But there has been no decision on extending Title 42.
President Biden at the White House soon after the president issued a statement that read, "I want to clarify that in comments at the conclusion of my remarks this morning, I was referring to the CDC's mask mandate, and there is no Department of Justice action on Title 42. Well, on that mask mandate, airlines and public transit mask mandate was just struck down by a federal judge as being beyond the powers of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Justice Department has announced it plans to appeal the ruling, if not to save this mandate, then to prevent a precedent from being set that might hinder future action to address a public health emergency by those government agencies. COVID-19 pandemic, now more than 2 years old, and today Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra asked if and when he sees the U.S. getting back to normal and how.
What can Americans expect on the near horizon from your department, both by way of guidelines, ways to restore the normalcy of day-to-day life? What should we be thinking about? We now know that masks on airplanes are no longer required, but of course that's being challenged by the Department of Justice. So there is some uncertainty in the moment, but give us your best sense about how we manage this next phase of the transition from pandemic to endemic.
So there I'd say, Dr. Coles, let's not count our chickens too quickly. There are still Americans who are immunocompromised. There are still Americans for whom the vaccines are not fully effective. There are still Americans who are under the age of 5 who are not yet eligible to get vaccinated. We still are losing hundreds of Americans every day from COVID. And so we're not around the corner. And so we still have to be careful. It's as, again, if you're on the 1 yard line with that football, you don't just start playing loose, fast and loose with your 4 downs. You got to get over the goal line. Let's get over the goal line. And so that's the most important thing, because we know we still have to deal with things on a long-term basis, the endemic state we might be in. And that's where, talk to all those Americans who are still feeling the effects of COVID, what we call long COVID. Talk to all those Americans who lost their job. Talk to those Americans who've been going through some real mental stress. 100,000 Americans documented died from overdose in the last year that we had the records for 2020. It's tough. And so we have a lot of work to do. But what we want to make sure is that we're prepared for what might come next, whether it's a variant or a new form of a disease. We want to learn from what COVID taught us. And that's where I think as we deal with something like COVID as an endemic challenge, we recognize what we can do. We can get vaccines out there quicker than we thought. We can participate without making people feel like it's going to break their bank to be able to get the vaccine. We want to make sure that people can discern the truth from the misinformation. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that no one's safe till everyone's safe. And that doesn't mean just America, it means the world. We have work to do, but we can do it. And that's the great thing about this country, and why so many people count on us around the world to be in the game, is because they know when America says we can do it, we will.
Javier Becerra, the Health and Human Services Secretary, interviewed by Dr. Tony Coles, the CEO of Cerevel Therapeutics, a program today hosted by the Council on Foreign Relations. On Wall Street, the Dow down today, 368, NASDAQ down 278, S&P down 65. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says an interest rate increase of 0.5 percentage points, twice the usual pace, is possible at the Fed's policy meeting in May as they seek to tame high inflation. He told a panel of international economic officials at the International Monetary Fund meeting in Washington, it's appropriate, in my view, to be moving a little more quickly to raise interest rates. He said it's absolutely essential to restore price stability. The Band of the Coldstream Guards, brass band in the British Army, outside Windsor Castle in Great Britain, playing Happy Birthday in honor of Queen Elizabeth II's 96th birthday. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson posting a video with his own birthday good wishes.
I'm delighted to wish Your Majesty a very happy birthday and to pay my heartfelt tribute to your 70 years of dedicated and faultless service to our country and the Commonwealth. Millions of people cherish a particular moment of your reign, and for me, it has to be the opening ceremony of the London Olympics in 2012, when Your Majesty arrived, at least figuratively, by jumping from a helicopter escorted by James Bond, and then the trumpet sounded and Your Majesty made your entrance, and the entire stadium rose as one and burst into applause. Thousands of people from almost every country in the world, with 1 billion more watching at home. And that fantastic moment showed yet again Your Majesty's unique ability to bring people together in joyful harmony. And as we look forward to celebrating your Platinum Jubilee in June, our hearts swell with appreciation and pride that Your Majesty is our Queen.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in a posted video on the Queen's 96th birthday. That Platinum Jubilee, marking 70 years on the throne for the Queen, will be June 2nd through the 5th. She's the longest reigning British monarch, the longest serving female head of state in history. Among the tributes so far in the Jubilee, toymaker Mattel creating a Queen Elizabeth II Barbie doll. It has an ivory gown, blue ribbon with decorations of order, and a bejeweled tiara, now on sale. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for more Washington stories with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Go to c-span.org/connect to sign up. And I hope you have a good night.